Now we're just going to move on to regular motivation. We're done. All right. So the belongingness motivation. Now, these motivations are going to be outside of the biological drives. It's not really going to adhere to drive reduction theory because remember, drive reduction theory has to deal with survival. You're thirsty, you're hungry. So that drives you towards a behavior. These motivations are going to be more in the humanistic wheelhouse. Okay, remember that hierarchy of needs where near the top of the pyramid, you reach self-actualization. At the bottom is your basic survival, water, food, shelter. Then you move higher up and you start forming self-esteem and family and friend ties. So the belongingness motivation stems from a need for affiliation. So this is a social motivation. This is the idea that humans are social creatures. Okay, we don't hang out by ourselves. We like to form groups. Now, what motivates us to form those groups? Well, if you're thinking of evolutionary benefit, being in a group helps survival. It's a lot harder for a lion to take you out if you're surrounded by a bunch of other cavemen. So it helps survival by forming those relationships. If you break your leg and you can't hunt, well, if you were by yourself, you would die to death. Okay, but if you have a community around you who can feed you and give you water until your leg heals, then you have a better chance of survival. So the affiliation need helps with survival. It also creates relationships that are evolutionarily beneficial because they are able to pass genes on to the future through those relationships, through those family ties, and that survival methodology. Also, social ties feel good. Okay, this affiliation need results in increased levels of serotonin, which is associated with mood and the decrease in depression. And it's also associated with decreasing the amounts of pain that you feel. Okay, so it feels good, helps you live, and you can pass on your genes. All very strong arguments for why we have an affiliation need. Achievement motivation. This is exactly what it sounds like. It's the desire to do stuff. It's having high expectations for yourself. You want to achieve. And successful people, motivated people, often set challenging but attainable goals. So you want it to be challenging enough to keep your attention, but not so challenging that you get bored and give up. So this deals with the arousal theory, Yerkes-Dodson's law, where if you have too much of a challenge, you lose motivation because it's too hard. If you have too little of a challenge, then you lose motivation because it's too easy. Instead, you want to be right here, okay, where your performance is high and your arousal is high. So you're focused on what you're doing and you're doing it well. So when you want to set challenging but attainable goals, if I set a goal for myself to pass the AP physics exam, that's definitely challenging, right? But is that attainable for me? Absolutely not. I would just write like the entire intro to Star Wars on my paper. Like, it's not happening. I slept through most of physics. I'm not even going to lie. Okay, that would be very challenging but unattainable. If I said I'm going to make a 6 on the AP Psych exam, that's impossible. The highest it goes is 5. If I say I want to make a 3 on the AP Psych exam, that's attainable for me, definitely. But is that challenging? No. I could probably like guess on half the multiple choice, at this point, because I can write FRQs. Okay, that would not be challenging enough. So that doesn't meet my achievement motivation. I want to do something that is challenging, but it's possible. Like, oh, I'm going to try to make a 4 on the AP US history exam. Maybe for math and science, not my thing. I'm not going to aim that high. I'm going to be more reasonable and lower the standards. So the goals that you set can either be performance goals or they can be learning goals. Okay, performance goals are extrinsic. You do them because of what you can get from doing them. For instance, if you take a bunch of AP classes and tests so that you can have a bunch of cords on graduation, so you're like decked out, like so many cords that your neck hurts from carrying them, that's performance goals. That's extrinsic reward. Okay, you want to take the tests and pass the tests that you can get a court, or you can be in a National Honor Society, or you can wear a fancy stole, or you can be valedictorian. Learning goals are intrinsic. That would be if you decide to take an AP class because you're interested in the content, and you're going to take the test because you feel confident that you can do it and you can get the credit. Okay, so like if you signed up for AP Psych rather than AP Environmental Science, is because you're intrinsically motivated towards this class, as opposed to AP Psych was the only thing left on your choice form because all other 4 choices you had already got filled. That would be extrinsic. Which one do you think is stronger as a motivation? Correct, intrinsic. Okay, that motivation lasts longer. Now, David McClelland is the psychologist associated with this idea of achievement motivation. Through his experiments with the Bonzo box, he found that people with a high need for achievement choose the moderate tasks. So not too easy, not too hard, just right in the middle. Think Goldilocks, right? And I'll have this video of McClelland's theory of needs posted in the Schoology page. So if you were to identify where a person with high achievement motivation would try to take their shot on the basketball court, where would they stand? At point A, point B, point C, or point D? And remember that high achievement motivation means they want something that's moderately difficult, something challenging but attainable. Okay, good. Most of y'all are putting C. A is too easy. Okay, even I could make a basket. Is that what you call it? Even I could shoot a hoop from right underneath, I'm trying guys, from right underneath the basket or the rim, sports ball. B, I could probably make that shot too. All I gotta do is hit the backboard and get it into the basket thingy. D, way too hard. A half court shot, I'm not gonna make it. But C, maybe with practice, okay, and over time, I can learn how to make shots from here, 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 and here. Is this the free throw line? Some of y'all basketball people know better than I would. No? Is this the free throw line? Okay, I'm following Nathan's nods. Okay, so A would be too easy. D would be too hard. Okay, C would be moderately difficult. Okay, something that you would actually see as a challenge. So there are 2 types of motivation. You should already be familiar with the idea of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Remember that intrinsic means you're doing it because you want to do it. It's driven by a personal interest in the activity. Extrinsic is performing it because you want to get something out of it, or performing it so you don't get in trouble for not doing it. So getting rewards or avoiding punishments. Okay, so doing your homework, probably extrinsically motivated. You don't want to zero in I now. You don't want late points. Unless it's an assignment you're really excited about doing. Like maybe it's a video paper essay that you have to watch a TV show and talk about clinical psychology as it relates to the show. Okay, that might be more entertaining to you, so you're more likely to do it. And like we said before, intrinsic is stronger than extrinsic because it's internal motivation. Okay, now when it comes to these motivations in terms of cultures, we see 2 different societies. We live in a society that adhere to intrinsic versus extrinsic goals. So collectivistic societies are typically found in the Eastern Hemisphere, and they prioritize the needs of the group over the needs of the individual. Individualistic societies are more common in the Western Hemisphere, and they prioritize the individual over the group. So examples of this, the COVID pandemic. In the East, you see high rates of mask wearing. Okay, the group comes together to protect individual members of the society from the pandemic. It's collectivistic. That's the cultural understanding of you need to put others before yourself. Versus in individualistic societies like Europe or the United States, there is a lot more resistance to mask wearing. There's a lot more resistance to lockdowns. Okay, because it was claimed it was an infringement of individual liberties or personal liberties. So the liberties of the individual are more important than the well-being of the group. Okay, now that's not an individual understanding of each person in those countries or in those cultures. That's just a cultural zeitgeist or a general trend that we see. Okay, so collectivistic societies versus individualistic societies. Who do they prioritize, the group or the individual? And that can bring some insight into cultural behaviors in those countries. We've talked about the over-justification effect previously with the pizza party and reading scores. If you love reading, but then you start getting rewarded with pizza, then what's going to happen to your love of reading? It's going to decrease because you get over-justified. You are excessively rewarded with a prize for something that you intrinsically already loved doing. So that decreased your intrinsic desire to do it. Okay, real life example. Who is this very famous football player? Yes, Nathan, Colin Kaepernick. Back in the day, he signed a 6-year, $114 million contract with the 49ers. Okay, is he a good football player? Yes. Does he love football? Yes. He got paid a lot of money because of his football abilities, sports, but didn't get to play much. So he's still getting all of this money, the extrinsic reward for being a football player, but he doesn't get to actually play football. Okay, so what do you think that happened to his intrinsic love of football? Probably decreased because it was over justified. He doesn't get to play it. Okay, and then of course you have the other retaliations that were made against him during his career with the 49ers. But you see how this over-justification effect can play a role, okay, in your intrinsic desires. Although if you could pay me $114 million to not exercise, I would take that so fast. This is just an example of extrinsic versus intrinsic. Getting $5 for every A, you only study as long as you get paid, versus praise from your parents and you just love doing well. That's intrinsic. There are 4 types of conflict in this unit. You have the approach, you have the avoidance, you have the approach avoidance, and you have the multiple approach avoidance. Now, a lot of stress can come from making decisions, even if they're decisions that have positive outcomes, even if it's a decision where you win no matter what you do, okay? Because you might wonder, well, what if I had done X, Y, and Z instead? This is called the approach conflict for decision making. An example of this would be you have 2 options, and they're both attractive options. There are positives to both of these options, hence approach. There's no negatives. But you have to choose only one. Let's say you get a full ride to Harvard and a full ride to Yale. That is excellent, right? But you can't go to both at the same time. You're going to have to pick which one you go to. They're both attractive goals, but you're going to enter into a state of tension or stress over having to decide which one you're going to choose to go to. Hence it being called approach conflict. You have 2 options and they're both good. Avoidance is when you have to choose between 2 undesirable options. Like let's say you get to history class and they say you can either write an LEQ or a DBQ today. Well, do you want to write an essay at all? No. But you have to write one, so you're in conflict of, I can't avoid either of these essays. I need to pick which one I'm going to do, the LEQ or the DBQ. The avoidance conflict is when you have 2 options, but they're both bad. So you don't want to make a decision because neither one really makes you feel good, but you feel like you have to. This is something that happens a lot in the American voting booth. Instead of voting for people, voters tend to vote against somebody. Okay, so you may have 2 options. Those are the only 2 options for the presidency because we're a 2-party system where you can either vote for the Democrats or the Republicans, but maybe you don't like either the Republican or the Democratic nominee. Okay, so you vote anyway, but you tell yourself you're voting for the lesser of 2 evils. So it's avoidance, avoidance. You have to make a decision, but you don't like either one. Kind of like if I said you need to write an essay, do you want it to be an LEQ or a DVQ? And you're just like, no, I don't want either of those things. It's like, too bad. You're doing one or the other. Approach avoidance conflict is when you have one goal. So you notice that approach and approach avoidance were two separate goals. Approach avoidance conflict is one goal, and there are pros and cons for that decision. You've already made the decision, but there's positives and negatives for it. Okay, so if you're buying a new car, you get the car that you want, but it's expensive. So positive, you got the one you wanted. Negative, it's difficult to afford. Or positive, you got the car you wanted, but negative, it costs a lot of money to put gas into that car. Okay, so the decision's already been made, but there are positives and negatives. Kind of like with virtual learning. The decision was made, and there are positives and negatives associated with it. You don't get an option between virtual or face-to-face. It's simply, you're in this situation, here are the pros and cons. Hence, approach avoidance conflict. It's still stressful. For instance, if you are deciding whether or not you want to go to Auburn, well, some attractive features, they gave you a full ride. Unattractive features, you have to live on campus the entire time you're at school. Attractive features, all your friends are going there. Unattractive features, so is your ex. Okay, so it's a approach avoidance because it's like, okay, there's some good things and some bad things with this one choice. The last one is multiple approach avoidance. This is when there's a multitude of positive and negative choices between two choices. Let's say you're going to prom and you're going with your bae, right? Y'all have been dating for a while, you've known for a while you're going to go to prom together, you've already got the limo planned and all of that. Well, then all of a sudden Beyonce DMs you and says, hey, I hear you're going to prom, can I be your date? Well, now you have two choices, and there are positives and negatives to both of those choices. You could go to prom with your boo, all right, and have a really good time, but you miss out on going to prom with Beyonce, okay, which everyone would be like, what are you doing? Then, if you choose to go with Beyonce, however, your boo might feel a certain kind of way. They might be like, seriously, you choose Beyonce? Well, actually, no, that's fair. But seriously? So you have two negatives and two positives. Can't have both. So it's multiple approach avoidance. You have to decide what your decision is, and there's going to be pros and cons on both sides. Honestly, if Beyonce wanted to take me to prom, I'd be like, forget everybody else. This is my life now. Double approach avoidance conflict is when you have two goals or two choices that have positives and negatives. This is the most common and the most complex tension state that you're going to come across in your life. So if you had the choice between going to prom with Zac Efron or your boyfriend, well, there's positives and negatives to that. There's positive going with Zac Efron. That's cool. You'll have a good TikTok or Instagram photo, whatever it is that kids do now. But your boyfriend might be upset with you. Versus if you go to prom with your boyfriend, but then you miss out on that cool Instagram shot with Zac Efron. Okay, so there's negatives and positives for both of those choices, but you still have to make a choice.